This is the Cooey Model 60, also known as the Cooey Ranger, the Ranger being a store-branded version as sold by Eaton's Department Store of Canada. The Cooey is a basic bolt-action 22 rimfire with a tube magazine. These inexpensive, rugged, and accurate little 22 rifles were manufactured by the H.W. Cooey Machine Arms Company of Coburg, Ontario, from approximately 1939 until 1967. H.W. Cooey was sold to U.S. interests in 1961 and became Winchester Western Canada Limited. Manufacture of the Model 60 continued under the Winchester brand, and in 1967 a revised version called the Model 600 was introduced. Cooey rifles were sold not only in Canada but also in the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries. The Model 60 is constructed entirely of wood and metal. There is no plastic in its construction. The rifle handles all 22 short, 22 long, and 22 long rifle cartridges. The action of the rifle is very basic, with the root of the bolt handle acting as a locking lug. The safety is engaged by withdrawing the striker to the rear and rotating it in a counterclockwise motion into the safety catch notch. This withdraws the striker from contact with the sear. There is also a half-cock notch which keeps the firing pin and the striker separate so that the rifle may be carried safely in an uncocked position. To load the rifle, first ensure that the bolt is forward, then withdraw the inner magazine tube and expose the loading port. Cartridges may be dropped into the loading port until the magazine is full. Capacity is 11 22 long rifle cartridges and 15 22 short cartridges. When you're finished loading the magazine, simply slide the inner magazine tube back into position and twist the catch to lock it in place. The next step in loading is to chamber a round by working the bolt handle. Operating the bolt handle forces a round from the magazine up into the grip of the extractor. The extractor holds the cartridge in place while it's being chambered by the bolt. This particular rifle was drilled and tapped at the factory for a side mount scope. In this case there's an N3 Weaver side mount, and I've got a 7/8 inch Tasco scope, which I had to hunt around at a couple of gun shows to find because it's a kind of an oddball size scope. Most 22 scopes are 3/4 of an inch in diameter. The combination of scope and rifle has worked out pretty well, and it's proven to be fairly accurate. Here I'm taking a crack at some 50-yard and 100-yard steel silhouettes. The only downfall to this scope mount arrangement is that the Cooey ejects the cartridge cases straight up, and occasionally they will bounce off the scope mount back into the action and jam it up. So it is somewhat less reliable than it would be without a scope on it at all. Next we'll have a look at the kind of accuracy you can expect to get from one of these little Cooey rifles. The first ammunition I'll be using is Winchester Dynapoint GT. This is the 500 round bulk pack. Sells for about $22 I believe here. And this is 40 grain copper plated 22 long rifle. And we'll have a look at a 5-shot group at 50 yards. The black patch is 1 inch square. Another 5-shot group at 50 yards. And the last group at 50 yards is a 4-shot group. So quite good accuracy from this ammunition. And last of all, we have a 5-shot group at 100 yards. Next I'm going to shoot a little bit of vintage CIL Imperial 22 short ammunition. This is probably 35-40-year-old ammunition. The main advantage to shooting shorts on this rifle is the fact that the magazine holds 15 of them as opposed to 11 with the long rifles. And also the muzzle report is quite a bit lessened. As you can tell, it's a pretty quiet round to shoot, and it's suitable for short-range use in areas where noise might be a problem. Unfortunately, shorts generally will not shoot as good a groups as long rifle, and this is primarily because there's a very long jump between the cartridge case and the rifling, and you will not get as good a grouping from this ammunition as a general rule. So let's have a look at the 5-shot group. As you can see, quite a bit wider. Next we'll have a look at some old IVI Imperial target ammunition. And once again, this is 25-year-old ammunition, and the group sizes are not as good as they are with the fresh Winchester Dynapoint ammunition. Last of all, let's have a look at how to strip and assemble this little rifle. Very basic takedown. There's a large knurled nut on the underside of the stock. Unscrew this, and when it's unscrewed all the way, simply lift the action clear of the stock. With the action pulled clear of the stock, we can have a quick look to see how the mechanism operates. When the bolt is cycled, you can see the cartridge feeding mechanism move to the rear and upward, and this feeds a cartridge from the tubular magazine into the extractor. To take the rifle down further, it's necessary to have a half-inch wrench or an adjustable wrench, and you need to loosen the nut on the bottom of the magazine tube. Once that's loosened sufficiently, unscrew the threaded portion below that, and when this is loosened up sufficiently, the feeding mechanism will disengage from the bolt, and once this is free to move, as you see here, the bolt may be operated and pulled out to the rear. You'll need to pull the trigger to get the bolt completely out of the receiver. And the bolt is a very simple design, has fairly sturdy extractors and a very large firing pin, which gives a very positive strike to the cartridge. To reassemble, reinsert the bolt into the receiver. You'll have to pull the trigger to get the bolt to go into the receiver. Make sure you've got both the root of the bolt handle and the cocking guide knob lined up with the slot, and pull the trigger once again to make sure the striker is ahead. Then wiggle the feed mechanism around until it snaps into place on the bottom of the bolt. Next, screw the threaded rod up against the magazine tube, and you'll have to do some trial and error here to get the required amount of tension. If it's not screwed up far enough, the mechanism will pop out from the bolt. If it's screwed in too far, it will bind the magazine from cycling back and forth as is required. So there'll be some trial and error here. Operate the action to see if everything works smoothly. And once you're satisfied that it does, you can snug the nut down again. Once again, not too much pressure here, just enough to hold everything in place. And after that, simply reinsert the action into the stock and tighten down the nut, and reassembly is complete. And that concludes my look at the Cooey Model 60, a much underrated Canadian rifle, but one that's a lot of fun, and it's one of the first rifles as a kid that I was ever allowed to take out and shoot unsupervised, so it kind of holds a warm place in my heart. Thanks for watching.